Hello, Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is actually three books in one volume. Prelude to a Million Years from 1933, Song Without Words from 1936, and Vertigo from 1937, all written by Lynd Ward. This version published by the Library of America in 2010. It's 694 pages. In addition to these three novels, it also contains four short essays that Lynd wrote about the three books and about his woodcut technique, and it includes a chronology of Ward's life and an introduction by Art Spiegelman, the author of Mouse. Lynd Ward was an artist and book illustrator who was born in 1905 and died in 1985. He's considered to be one of the fathers of the graphic novel. Between 1929 and 1937, he published six of what he called wordless novels. These were books made up entirely of woodcut illustrations with no text, but they all tell stories, adult, very intense, tragic stories, all done with illustrations. After finishing the final book, Vertigo, this book contains the last three of these wordless novels. He started work in 1940 on a seventh book, but didn't finish it. And then he never wrote another wordless novel after that. He instead turned to illustrating books, mostly children's books. In 1953, he won the Caldecott Medal for Best Children's Illustrated Book for a book called The Biggest Bear. But this book contains the final three of his wordless novels, these picture-only stories, which had a great influence on graphic novelists up until this time. The first book, Prelude to a Million Years, the first book in this series, it was actually the fourth of his six books, is made up of 30 illustrations. And it tells the story of a young sculptor who has a dream in which he sees a beautiful woman emerging from a flower. Now, as you can tell from this illustration here, these are all woodcut illustrations. He was very much influenced by Art Deco design and by the work of painter Thomas Hart Benton. So he sees this vision of a beautiful young woman, and he immediately goes to work to try to create this vision of this beautiful woman in marble. So he works tirelessly on this gigantic, larger-than-life sculpture. But in doing so, he neglects the world outside his studio. And one day when he goes outside, or as he's leaving his studio, he sees a woman being beaten by her husband. And then when he goes outside, remember this was it came out in 1933 during the depths of the Great Depression. He's accosted by a homeless guy who's asking for food or money. And then he comes across a group of strikers protesting, being shut out of the factory, and they're being attacked by police officers and beaten. And so all of this causes him to realize that his work, trying to create something beautiful, is really pointless. It doesn't have any effect on these poor people, these suffering masses, the starving, the workers who are being attacked by the police, and it all seems futile. And so he falls into a deep depression. He picks up a prostitute, takes her back to his studio, but that doesn't please him either. And in the end, he's seen in despair, grasping the feet of his unfinished sculpture. So, not a particularly cheerful story. The next wordless novel, Song Without Words, is the shortest of his six. It only has 21 illustrations, and it came out in 1936. And it was a book inspired by his wife's pregnancy. He imagines a young woman who finds out she's pregnant in a fascist country. It's probably Nazi Germany, but we're not given that explicitly. And she's terrified about bringing a child into this horrible government world where there's no freedom. And as you can see here, it's full of symbolic imagery. Here she is fleeing these birds of prey. And she really, really is terrified about what's going to happen. But in the end, her husband comforts her. They do have their child, and it ends in a somewhat hopeful note. Remember, this book came out before World War II, so he was kind of ahead of the curve on projecting the evils of the Nazi regime. His final work is by far the longest and most ambitious. Vertigo came out in 1937. It's made out of 230 illustrations. And it's the most complex. It tells three different stories. A story of a young girl, a young boy, and an elderly business tycoon. The young girl turns out to be very talented at music. Her father buys her a violin, and she masters it and goes to college and becomes very successful as he graduates. And she falls in love with this young boy, as we see here. And everything seems to be going well for a while, but then her father loses his job because the elderly guy, the tycoon, these stories are all interconnected, the elderly tycoon realizes that his profits are falling, so he shuts down some factories, lays off a bunch of people, and puts other people on part-time status so they're not making as much money. And in despair, the girl's father tries to commit suicide. He shoots himself, but he survives, but he goes blind. And so he can't work, and she can't make any money off her music, and they both wind up being evicted from their house and wind up standing in a bread line to get food. Meanwhile, the elderly, as we said, the elderly tycoon is told that his profits are dropping, and so he decides to cut back on expenses and lay off people, but that doesn't go well with the workers, and they start protesting and striking, and so he calls out a bunch of thugs to attack them and chase them off, and then he gets near death, but he gets a blood transfusion, and ironically, the blood transfusion comes from the young man. The young man who's engaged to the girl with the violin, the musician, he goes off to try to find work and support her because he wants to marry her, but he doesn't have a job. And it goes through this long series of illustrations where he's trying to find work and he can't find work anywhere. And he's also falls into despair, but he gets a chance to donate blood. And so he makes money donating blood to the elderly man, and the blood transfusion saves the elderly tycoon's life. And so the elderly tycoon recovers, and then his accountant tells him that the economy's making a turn for the upturn and things are looking better. So he survives thanks to the blood transfusion of the boy. The boy, or the young man, goes back to now that he's got some money, goes back to try to find his fiancée, but then he finds out when he gets to her house that they've been evicted. And so he doesn't know where she's at. And the book also ends in despair. So none of these stories are particularly happy. They were all written by Lynd. Lynd's father, Lynd Ward's father, was one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties, ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. And so he was raised as a socialist, a left-wing socialist. And of course, this is in the 1930s when socialism was at its peak of popularity in the United States. So these are all kind of grim, Bertolt Brecht type stories of left-wing agitation. And they're just incredibly illustrated. These black and white woodcut illustrations are just really remarkable. And, of course, the reason Ward is so important historically to the graphic novel is he showed way back in the 30s that you could do books like this, that you could tell serious, tragic adult stories in purely illustration form. You didn't need to have text. You could tell a story without a bunch of text. And he inspired whole generations of graphic novelists to go beyond just telling kid stories to tell stories for adults in graphic form. Now, if you're interested in this, if this has been appealing, the Library of America has a companion volume to this that has Ward's other three wordless novels. So you can collect all 6 in 2 volumes if you're interested in that. The book is three wordless novels by Lynd Ward, published in 2010. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.